which means the internet is watching us. So whether or not you're ready, I'm going to start talking because no one wants to watch a boring live stream. So, hey, internet. Hi, I'm Jim, and this is a session that hopefully you're here for on purpose, not on accident. If you're here on accident, I still thank you. It's called this. So we're going to talk about digital ministry as real ministry, virtual realities and real virtualities, which is great, I think, given like the webinar people we have watching, like the real virtualities right there. But for us in the room, we'll just make it up as we go too. So let me tell you a bit about who I am so you know who this person is talking for the next 60 minutes or so. This is a sense of my life in icons. I was born the same day as the first commercial cell phone call. So me and this thing, we're like a little Jacob and Esau going on here. And just like cell phones back in the 80s when Zach Morris had his big chunky cell phone, I was a little chunky toddler. And then as cell phones got, slimmer and sexier and smarter. Nope. Okay, fine. But for me, this technology and we've grown up together. I only know a world where these things emerged as I did in the world as well. I didn't grow up. I grew up remembering my first email address, juno.com. Anyone else? Juno.com email? Oh, okay, there we go. I remember collecting AOL CDs. You could have free minutes on the internet. And just seeing how technology continues to emerge and evolve around us and grow up as I found myself growing up in the world. I find myself swimming in these digital waters, just wondering where it might take us and what games of Marco Polo we might play as we invite others into the deep end of this pool. So I'm kind of all in on this digital thing. I'm kind of curious to see where it's going to take us and what it means to be human when we're already cyborgs. How many of you memorize all the phone numbers of the people you call? Nope, you've outsourced your consciousness to technology. Yeah, resistance is futile. It's okay. Star Trek reference? Nobody? Come on. Thank you. So that's me. I'm the cell phone. I'm curious to see where this thing is going to go. And then I'm especially interested when it comes to the church because I don't know about you, but sometimes the church feels like it was built 2,000 years ago. So we got to ask the question, what does it mean to not just be the church back then, but the church now, and maybe even the church tomorrow? And technology continues evolving and emerging around us, and can the church be a part of that movement? So that's where I'm at. I'm interested in that stuff. The megaphone, so one of the ways that I explored this most recently in a kind of public online project was something called 30 Seconds or Less, which was just a hobby that I had fun with that turned into thousands of episodes of online content that I would make with a podcast and eventually a YouTube channel called 30 Seconds or Less, where they were all just people sharing ideas about faith and spirituality and technology and justice or whatever I was interested in, or Keat talking about his book for a week, or various things for 30 seconds or less. I listed as a thing here because I still love it. I no longer do it daily. It was a daily project for about 4 years. But one of the big parts of it that I'd encourage you all to kind of look into for this world of digital ministry as real ministry was a series I did last year for Lent. Was it just last year? Called the 30-Second Bible, where I went through the entire Bible 30 seconds at a time. Each book had at least 2 episodes. One was kind of giving a summary of the Bible in 30 seconds, and one was giving the good news of that book in 30 seconds. And the best part of this series was I only recorded like 5 of them. I had like 100 other people record them as well. It was a cool project because you had like Rob Bell and Brian McLaren on the same project as seminary students. So it's a really fun thing. You can hear like Brian McLaren talk about Genesis and Diana Butler-Bass talk about Revelation and a whole bunch of stuff. So that's I just love playing and saying, what could this be, and evolving how it goes. That's a whole other conversation. This little fire thing, Pentecost, I guess, I stand here. I work for a company called the Center for Progressive Renewal, where I am the director of online learning, which really means I ask questions like, what does ongoing faith formation and resourcing look like in this lovely digital sandbox we find ourselves in? progressiverenewal.org is where you can go to find out more about the resources we provide there. This little stained glass thing is the logo of the church I work for. I'm the Associate Minister of Digital Strategy and Online Engagement at the Riverside Church in New York City, where I get to ask questions about how do we continue to find ourselves leaning into these digital resources for the future. I love the fact that, so Riverside used to have a radio station called WRVR. Dr. King's Beyond Vietnam speech that he gave just about 51 years ago was broadcast on WRVR, and it was like this innovative communication technology of the day. And are we just going to be institutions that look back to the innovations of the past, or can we find ourselves continuing that process of innovating in the future? So my job at Riverside is to really ask a lot of those questions around digital media and communication technologies. One of them is called Church Talk. It's a new project myself and another pastor are launching. It's a YouTube video and podcast combined thing. You can find all that stuff there at trcnyc.org/digital discipleship. And then this one, there's a new secret project coming that maybe the guy sitting there in the blazer, Keith Anderson, and I are conspiring on together. So stay tuned for that one coming soon this year. It's a new project. It's going to be a new podcast. So just wait. Coming to digital cathedrals everywhere. Okay. So that's who I am. So we're going to chat a bit about a couple things, specifically digital ministry as real ministry. I do a handful of things that could fall under the umbrella of digital ministry. The other thing I find myself facing a lot is people asking, well, like, when are you going to do the real ministry? Just the other day, they might not say it that crassly, but I did. So a couple Sundays ago, I officiated a baptism and communion on Sunday morning at Riverside. It was fantastic. And a couple people at coffee hour were saying to me afterwards, they're like, it was really great to see you doing some of these pastoral things. And I'm just like, you mean the other stuff I do isn't pastoral things? There is this just in the water understanding at times that this digital stuff, it's not real. It's just digital, right? Well, as has been said in many of the gatherings this weekend, digital is not the opposite of real. Digital is the opposite of physical. They are both real. The friends I make online are real friends. And the friends I meet in a physical space are also real friends. I happen to think that when I'm allowing both of those spheres to overlap, the friendship deepens in so many ways. People who say, oh, those Twitter friends. I say, well, when you were a kid, did you ever do the practice of maybe with your classmates in school, taking out a piece of paper and a number 2 pencil and writing, dear person who lives across the country or around the world. This past week, I I'm reading fold it up, stick it in the mail. They get it. They send you one back. You read it. You write another one. This is not just old-fashioned Twitter. This is a pen pal. And a pen pal, everyone would say, is a real relationship, but there was nothing in a physical space about it. So these digital virtual spaces are just as real. They are making an impact in our real world. These virtual realities and these real virtualities, the lines become blurred between the two. This is what I'm interested in. Asking the questions about the blurring of those lines and where we can find ourselves truly embodying the cyborgs that we've always been, at least since 1983 and the first commercial cell phone call on my birthday. So we're going to talk about 5 practical things that I'm doing with digital platforms and trying out and experimenting with. But before we do that, we're going to keep the plane in the air, and we're going to talk about 3 higher level kind of philosophical approaches I have towards this digital ministry thing. When I think about digital ministry as real ministry, these are 3 kind of higher level influences or lenses that I'm always keeping on that impact all the work that I do. So starting up here, then we'll land the plane, bring it down on the ground, and then we'll even have space to kind of take off again with the questions you have. So if you're thinking of specific practical applications in your context, that's where this whole thing is going. So starting up in here. Number 1. Okay, church, now let's get Reformation. If you're thinking Beyonce right now, that's good. Okay, ladies, now let's get information. Never mind. Okay, church, now let's get Reformation. Thank you, Lutherans, for 500 years ago pounding some nails in the doors that needed them to get this thing moving, to keep this thing moving, I would say.
You're welcome.
As has been said, I'm repeating much of the narrative of this weekend. It either means that, good artists borrow and great artists steal, or that great minds think alike. 500 years ago, this thing happened that forever changed the world. And I don't just mean the Reformation that led to the ongoing fragmentation of Christian denominations. I mean Gutenberg. Gutenberg built a thing that changed the world. I mean, we got one right here. Without Gutenberg, we wouldn't have hundreds of pages in binding like we have now. Gutenberg built a technology, popularized a technology that didn't just impact the church, but impacted the world. I would maybe say that that was the last time that the church was on the leading edge of cultural communication technologies in the world. We did it! We were the pioneers! We invented a thing that changed everything. Cool, we made our dent in the universe. Are we done? No! Well, sometimes it seems like we've put ourselves there. The church likes to live in the past, I think. Which isn't a bad thing. We can learn rearview mirrors are essential to driving forward, but let's keep driving forward. 500 years ago, the printing press changed it all. We've gone through massive communication shifts, as has been talked about, this broadcast era. Suddenly, it's not just words. The radio allowed sound to be transmitted into these devices, these magic boxes. Now moving pictures in color. You know, now we live in a world of VR and everything. But let's just stick with the broadcast era of radio and television. This was a huge shift in what it meant to be human, how we communicated with one another, how we absorbed information and content. A huge aspect, I think, of both the print and the broadcast era is that the direction of that information is one way. I don't get to say anything back to this book and have it make a big difference on the words on this page. I don't get to say anything back to Walter Cronkite and say, I disagree with you. I mean, I can shout all I want, but he's not hearing me. That was an era that existed in our world, and I think in so many churches today, we've done a really good job of mastering the broadcast era, an era that peaked maybe 60 years ago. Now we live in a world where there's another communication shift at play. This internet, I would say a networked era. Networked because the communication no longer travels in one direction. But if I disagree with a certain individual who tweets things from an office that's oval, I can say something back. If I have an opinion about the thing that was shared on this YouTube channel, I can leave a comment or even make my own video in response. This network era allows for the communication to flow in both directions, in more directions than ever possible. And the world is asking how we use this thing. Companies are figuring it out for their own capitalistic monetary investment benefit. Maybe that's what you're into, but you missed the point of Keat's stewardship seminar if you did. The world is trying to figure out how to use this network era, and the church is still saying we proudly figured out how to turn our sanctuaries into TV studios. Broadcast era. We are finally now asking the questions about the broadcast era 60 years ago. Are we going to be 60 years too late on this network era? I don't want to be that late. So that's me, who's, twins with this thing. This is not an iPhone 10, so sorry, I'm not being quite as sleek and sexy as I could today. I don't want to wait 60 years. I want to start asking the questions now about how we use this network era we're in. Okay, church, now let's get Reformation. If 500 years ago, a technology fueled the Reformation that changed the church with a technology that has changed the world, can we continue to find ourselves seeing the power of the tweet and the fact that the content that gets posted online is just as much real as the content that was produced in the broadcast era? Can we ask the question? So I don't have the answer, but I want to just say the lens I use for digital ministry is that question. I'm not going to be 60 years too late. What do we need to do now to use those tools? That's high airplane view number one. Number two, listening is louder than a shout. Listening is louder than a shout. In a noisy world, you don't make an impact by talking louder. You make an impact by listening deeper. This kind of dovetails with some practical things very quickly, but I believe that in our noisy internet world where suddenly everyone has a voice, that's the greatest thing ever. Yeah, except for now there's a lot of stuff to listen to and sift through. What does it mean for us as people of faith to, before we offer another proclamation with our mouths, perhaps we start by hearing the words that are being spoken around us and listen and be present. What Bethany Stoley talks about in her design thinking experiment you just had over at lunch in the session she's leading now, empathy and ethnography is the place that we begin. Listening is louder than a shout. Let's quickly land the plane. Some practical ways of this is if you are tweeting more content than you are replying to content, you're probably talking more than you're listening. Some simple things. Can you go to these online networks with the posture of listening to what's being said and engaging there before you have the audacity to think that they should be listening to you? In the online world, everyone's talking, so why don't we start by listening? What does it mean for the church to listen in a world full of shouts? And number 3, in this high-level 50,000-foot view, the Word made fresh. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We've all memorized this at one point in our life for a Christmas Eve service, I'm sure. And the Word became flesh and made its dwelling among us. Well, what does it mean for the Word to be made fresh? A couple thoughts on this. One is to just think about the language we use and the metaphors it conjures in our mind and how technologies impact the method of understanding and therefore impact the message. That's a lot of words to really be quoting a guy named Marshall McLuhan who said, the method is the message. The medium is the message. What you're doing is what you're learning. The way in which you learn it is actually the thing that's impacting you the most. So I say this to mean this phrase, whether it's this way or the original way, the Word made fresh, the Word made flesh. When we think of that concept of the Word, we, in our 21st century world, well, maybe there's probably lots of ways it goes. I think it probably, for many people, still goes to objects like this. The Word. Words are found in books. Words are things that are printed on paper and bound up, or maybe now we'll think of them as things we scroll through with our fingers. So we interpret a phrase with a technological methodology that was not around when that phrase was first issued. When John or whoever wrote John said the Word made flesh, they were not thinking of books because there was no such thing as a book. They were thinking of maybe scrolls, maybe just spoken word. But these technologies have impacted the way that we encounter this language and these texts. So does that change the meaning? Well, the method is the message, so maybe, kind of. The thing I want to be aware of is, are we aware of the ways in which our communication technologies are a part of the lens that we use to absorb this ancient message? The Word made flesh at one point never had a book as the metaphor, but now we've got books, we've got text, we've got tweets. So maybe the Word made fresh, a teenager might think of a text message or an emoji or a variety of things that didn't even exist when that phrase was first issued. And this is where I think that the invitation is that we then continue to embrace the Word made fresh. Not the Word made new. I'm not saying we need to do something that's never been done before, because if you try to do that, you're just being naive and ignoring all the people who've done that thing before. But the Word made fresh, the Word brought into the world around us. When I say Word, I don't need to preface that by saying, no, I'm talking about scrolls here, people. I can assume we're caught up in the 21st century and we're talking about Twitter, we're talking about things. This is why one time I preached a sermon, ended up being about Twitter, where I said things like, Jesus is the tweet and you are the hashtag. Because a hashtag gives it context, it gives it meaning, it puts it in association with a larger conversation. So if Jesus is the tweet, you are the hashtag. Can we be this Word made fresh? Yes?
I just wanted to add to that. I was looking at the coronation service, which is a liturgy, actually, that and none of us have seen it, right? I mean, actually you could have been alive for the. But anyway, we're all going to see it, right? I mean, at some point they're going to get a new monarch. So I was reading through to see what they said about, because I know that one of the gifts that's given to the queen or the king will be a Bible, and it's if you read, you can go online and see the whole liturgy. And there's a lot of nonsense, but the point where they get handed a scepter and a globe, an orb, or whatever. But there is a point where the Archbishop of Canterbury walks up and hands the monarch the Bible. And this is all scripted, and it's about 300 years old, this particular phrase. When the Bible is handed to the monarch, and we will all see this live, the Archbishop says, "Here are the lively oracles of God."
Huh.
And it just struck me, like, first of all, why don't we call it that? You know, I mean like,
the lively oracles of God.
Yeah, you're in a hotel room, you open up the drawer, and the thing there just was labeled the lively oracles of God. Like, you wouldn't pick that up.
You're all going to go print out new labels for the church Bibles in your pews, right?
Because the word Bible is so...
Is it hashtag lively oracles of God? Or?
Make it happen. This is your thing. Don't go with it. But it just struck me, like your phrase, the word made fresh, that there's no word in that phrase that is text, word, book, volume. I mean, there's lively oracles of God.
Yeah.
You know, that finally a term for the Bible, that, just like you're saying here, moves away from any connection to a written tradition at all. I mean, it throws you right into an oral tradition.
Yeah.
And then you wind up seeing the Bible as a way to the lively oracle, not itself a thing. But it's just so sad. So I asked some people, and it turns out one of the reasons that people don't call it that in England is because that phrase is reserved for that service.
Until now.
Until now, right? So make it happen. So we don't know the phrase because we're not familiar with that liturgy. This is so tragic. It's like a screw tape letter. The people who have the phrase don't want to use the phrase because it's for only that thing. Then who knew it? You can go 7 decades without using it. But I just think we should hashtag bring this back. That phrase to me is the first time, and you're mentioning this now is the second, where I've heard people talk about the need to just get away from terms and images that are slave to a page.
Yeah, the way in which we encounter this word evolves. So our language and the ways in which we understand it needs to evolve as well. If we only think of books for the word word, we're missing out on the emerging communication technologies that say, well, Jesus is the tweet made flesh. Jesus is the YouTube video made flesh. Jesus is the interaction you have as a human being with other human beings made flesh. I mean, that's incarnational theology, but we get so stuck in these modalities that it's like we don't even realize we're swimming in that water. It's the 2 fish who are swimming along, and they go past an older fish, and the older fish says, hey boys, how's the water? And the 2 fish keep swimming, and eventually they go, what the hell is water? We don't even know we're swimming in this stuff. It's just the language we've inherited, and we need to have moments to pause and say, wait, that's just an inherited piece of technology, a language, a thing. Let's keep moving with it. So that's a whole workshop right there. Next year at eFormation, coming from you. Okay, that's the high view. We're gonna bring the plane down. Okay, promise you it's not crashing, it's just landing. I want us to look at 5 very practical things that I'm trying out with those kind of lenses on. I mean, to me, I don't want this just to live in theory forever, although I would love to, pick this up with you over Twitter, or if you happen to be on the 520 Amtrak to New York, we can be seatmates and talk about it then. But I want us to really get to some ways that this is implemented with digital tools. So I'm going to share with you 5 different examples that I use on an ongoing basis in the work that I do in these spaces. Some of this might translate for what you do, some of this might spark some new ideas, and then at the end we'll have some space for conversation around other questions we have as well. So with Twitter, I like to think this platform allows me to have intentional curation. So the whole listening is louder than a shout. This kind of goes into that, where if I use Twitter as a listening platform rather than a broadcast platform, or maybe an engagement platform, if your tweets are just posting links to take people somewhere else, then you're just using Twitter as a digital bulletin board rather than seeing Twitter as its own modality of communication and experience. So I like to ask the question, how can I play with that experience? So I try to do intentional curation. One example of that is often on a Sunday, I make Twitter moments. And they sometimes look something like this. So this Twitter moment is a prayer that one of our pastors offered as the prayers of the people. I often have the clergy who are leading various points of worship email me the things they write for their liturgies so that I can turn it into social media content. But rather than it just existing as a thread of tweets, I package it as a Twitter moment, which is a thing you can do on Twitter by simply clicking the arrow, and you can put any tweet into a Twitter moment. It's a playlist, to use John Roberto's language, of tweets. It's a curated selection of Twitter content that can then be interacted with on your phone, online. It can be embedded on different places. So I will take things like a prayer and make it its own Twitter moment. Or I will take a collection of tweets that are tweeted by a variety of people during worship and gather them all as a Twitter moment for that Sunday. Rather than it just being me as Riverside's Twitter account broadcasting Riverside's things, I try to collect a conversation that's happening. Like, for example, say you're at a conference where there's a hashtag like eForm. Any one of you could go through that hashtag and start adding those tweets to a Twitter moment, and you would be making a curated experience of the conference. We can do this for all sorts of things. Justice issues happening in our world. You, as a faith leader, yourself, as your congregation, can curate all these pieces of content that exist into one place so people can then know how to find it all right there. This is built into the app on your phone and on your computer. It's that simple. So that's one way to do it there, intentional curation. I want to think deeply about like a theology of the retweet, how it's not just about saying my own words, but about what does it mean to amplify the voices of others and to share and collect those voices. Twitter is not just a place to be an echo chamber where I hear myself, at least some people use it that way. Again, he who must not be named. He might hear me if I talk too much about him. Twitter can be a space where we discover so many voices who've been saying so many amazing things, and we can share those voices to the world around us. This amplification aspect of it goes so much more beyond just a personal megaphone. So, number one, Twitter, intentional curation. Number two, digital first. And I find myself using Facebook, specifically Facebook Live, for some of this. I say digital first because often in the world of digital ministry, we end up doing digital second. Like many churches have a podcast. It's their Sunday morning sermon, recorded on Sunday morning, and then shared online. Was that sermon, what audience was that sermon communicated for? The online audience or the congregation that gathered in person? Now, you might have a lens and awareness that you're doing both simultaneously, but I'm guessing you're still feeding off the energy of the people in the room. Like right now, let's be honest, webinar people, I have a confession. I apologize for not acknowledging you enough because I can't hear you laughing at my jokes. We play off the energy around us. And when we make a podcast, when your Sunday morning sermon's a podcast, you're doing this thing in a physical space first, and then often you end up pitching it to the digital world second. What would happen if you wrote a sermon to be preached primarily to that digital audience? You might preach it differently, knowing that their first mode is hearing your voice, never seeing your face. What does it mean then to create digital content in our digital ministries that is digital first? For me, a couple places I've done this is through Facebook Live, specifically 2 different shows that I've developed at Riverside called Live from the Bell Tower and Ask a Riverside Pastor, where I literally just use my cell phone and film these 2 shows. And we do it in a couple ways. And these are things you can totally replicate. Well, you probably don't have a bell tower that's the tallest steeple in North America. But the thing about this is, what are those places in your church that are so compelling, but no one ever gets to set foot in? That corner of the church attic, or the boiler room, or the space that is there but never set foot into, that's off limits to the public. So every week or so, I bring a different staff member or a person from the community up to the bell tower, and I have a whole little rig for my cell phone that I can hold, with a little tripod thing, to do an episode of Live from the Bell Tower. And for 10 minutes or so, we're live on Facebook, and I'm just inviting this person to talk about what they do at the church and who they are, so our congregation locally and at large can get to know the community a little better. The one after I did this first episode with Amy Butler, we had about 12 calls to the gift shop asking if they could have tours to the bell tower, to which we had to say, sorry, it is not open to the public. One of our ministers just seems to always somehow get the key. So I simply take people up. This couple weeks ago, I took up our young adults pastor and about 25 young adults and interviewed all of them on Facebook. So you can just invite people into these seemingly inaccessible places. And this is made with the digital audience in mind first. A second one is Ask a Riverside Pastor, what you see down here. We have a handful of questions from a discipleship series we did last summer, questions people have about the Bible and church and God and faith. And myself and the minister of worship were asking, what are we going to do with these questions? She's like, can they be like on the website as like a blog or something, and we can write answers. And I go, oh, more words on the website. Yeah, that's really engaging content. Words on a page. Yeah. I said, well, let's think about ways that this could be really innovative and engaging for the people around us. So every week or so, I walk into a pastor's office, and I say, today we're going to see if Reverend Kevin Wright's here. We have a question for him. Let's see if he's home. We go in, and I sit down, and we talk about a question. It allows us to do, faith formation in a digital way first. These could be an adult Bible study series, but we're simply making it for Facebook. That's the primary use for this content. Now, confession, they do know I'm coming when I barge in their office, but I try to make it seem like it's set up. I know. Letting you know all my secrets. So I offer these as two ways to make digital content first, rather than just recycling your physical content for digital space. And things that anyone who has a Facebook account and a cell phone, you can do it. That's all it takes. So digital first.
I got a couple of comments from the webinar.
Yes.
Caroline said from earlier she doesn't really care that you're able to see her. And Amy said thank you for acknowledging this.
Caroline, Amy, so glad you're here. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone still tracking? Still moving? We need any stretches? Can you point to that? Okay. Number 3, unexpected engagement. A practical way I use this is with Instagram. Unexpected engagement. How many people here are using Instagram on any sort of a semi-regular or regular basis? Cool. How many people here know what Instagram is? Okay, cool. Just checking our world. So I, along with a lot of things I do at the church, managing our social channels and things, I play with our church's Instagram account. And I do a handful of things with this, from trying to give a behind-the-scenes view at different aspects with stories. I do a very intentional way of curating our profile content. Check out Riverside NYC to see what I mean by that. I'm trying to make Instagram into our own little art gallery. But then my favorite thing I do most regularly, I post on our Instagram channel maybe once or twice a week in a good week. I'm not Kim Kardashian. But what I do on a regular basis is keep track of the people who are posting content on Instagram at our location. Because Instagram lets you search photos by location. So you might think, well, I'm going to look up the Instagram photos posted in my city. You can search on Instagram, or I use a third-party app called Hootsuite, which lets me make all of that into just a stream of content. But whether it's through Instagram natively, on the website, on your phone, or through an app like Hootsuite, you can search by geolocation. So you can find people who are posting photos in your area. And so I always love, as a church, when this happens. Someone posts something, and I respond. Like, not as me, Jim Keat, but as the church. I love this thought in my head of like a person, a tourist a lot of times in New York, taking a picture of a big church, and then the church talks to you. Isn't that what we're supposed to do all along? So at times I try to be snarky when they're snarky. One of these, it has like a big stop sign, and I say, stop, and come on in the church. Various things. That was right there. But I try to have this moment of surprising them with the interaction that they get, an interaction they're probably not used to getting from a church. Imagine if you looked at the pieces of content posted in your area, however you identify that, and then you as a church started responding. Because first off, let's think about the ages of people who use these platforms. Twitter is used by, I think, roughly 20s to 40s is probably going to be your general average. Facebook is used by my mom and company. I use Facebook too, I'll be honest, but it's definitely is skewing older. It can be said things like Snapchat and Musical.ly are skewing younger. Instagram is still kind of in that young-ish age range. So you'll get primarily younger people posting these things, whether they're teenagers or millennials or younger Gen Xers posting these things. And I love thinking of an interaction. One of the memorable interactions they might have with the church is the church commenting on their Instagram posts. How can I have that unexpected engagement? And that is a very real ministry. The work I do to like Instagram posts and comment on them is a pastoral act, and I will claim it as such. Right up there with baptisms. Number 4, we're on the groundstone. How many of you have ever listened to a podcast? Okay. How many of you have ever recorded a podcast? I'm talking like production and everything, recording, editing, uploading. Cool. A few of us. The number went down, I'll be honest. How many of you would believe me if I told you within 24 hours you could have a podcast on iTunes? Yeah, a couple of you. Everyone in this room could. Well, as long as you have a smartphone. Let me clarify. So there's an access issue. Podcasts are becoming huge. It's not just for geeks from the 90s anymore. Thank you, Sarah Koenig, for taking serial to the masses and making podcasts a thing that we all love, or at least endure. But there's still, and it's interesting to think how, I'm going to go high again, word is becoming oral again. Whereas it used to be a written, it was oral, it was only oral, and then it became this written thing, whether that's digital, all these various ways, but it's becoming spoken again. We know this just in the way we see technology right now in Las Vegas at CES. How many objects in our world can you say, hey Siri? She just responded. We live in a world where we talk to Alexa, we talk to Google, we use our voice to interact with these technologies. So voice is not just listening to audio, but using your voice and audio, along with the continuing boom of podcasts, I think is a trend to pay attention to. And so you can capitalize on this in the way we create digital content using that medium of the digital voice, your spoken voice, of making podcasts. You might be thinking, oh, I don't have time to buy a Zoom H5 and get, Pro Tools on my MacBook and buy a whole setup for these things and so you don't need to. All you need is that app right there. Anyone know what it's called?
You're going to tell me.
I will. It's called Anchor. Anchor, just like it sounds. What Anchor does, it's an app on your phone. You set up an account. You can easily connect it to iTunes and various things. And it lets you, literally, I just open the app, and all I need to do is this. So I'm recording right now, a podcast, just trying this thing out. It's called Anchor. I pushed a button on my phone and open, and then I put it to my face, and I'm making a piece of digital content that once I pull it away from my face, stop recording. Done. Hit done. Add to station. We just made a podcast. In about 30 minutes, that'll be on iTunes.
You have to hold it to your face.
No, you don't. You can also just hit the button that says record, and you can talk like that. So we could be in a room. Let's try that one. Record. Okay, on the count of 3, I want everyone to shout out their an online handle they use, like your Twitter name, how to find you on Facebook, Instagram. If you're worried about privacy, don't worry. You're all shouting. No one will hear you, I promise. It's just for a fun party. And online people, too, shout from where you are. I'm looking at you, Caroline and Amy. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we just, You're all on the internet now. You can also make a phone call from the app, and the person that I call would then, that conversation gets recorded, and they are on the podcast. You can do a whole lot of things in this to edit within it. There's a whole lot it can do. It's a really powerful app that can do a lot, but the fact that as simple as that, you can make a podcast. Imagine if every Monday morning you sat down with a different congregant for coffee and just had a conversation about the sermon from Sunday and how it might have ripple effects into our life. Or imagine if you sat down with a person in the church who's working on an event, and you said, let's talk about this event you're doing. Let's just have a conversation about it and record the conversation. Publish, post, share a link to that to your congregation, post it online, something gets picked up by other people. You've been able to make this digital content as simple as a push of the button. ANCHOR. Just like, the ship's anchor. Look for that little logo, though, is what you want to get. It's as simple as that. We often think there's this huge barrier to being able to participate in these digital capacities, but often it's a matter of access and finding ways to make it more accessible. And yes, there's still an access issue. You need to have technology, a certain type of technology, internet connection, but once you pass certain barriers, it allows us all, oh, look, our podcasts have been posted. People, Jeremy just favorited it. Look at that. So a couple places. So they're posted to my channel on Anchor, which is available on their website. So it's like its own web page. But I have mine connected to iTunes. So these all become searchable Like I think the podcast is called like Jim Keat or Ideas Done Daily or something. I really just use it for things like this. And occasionally when I'm walking through New York, I'll just record ideas. But it's in a podcast feed. So someone could subscribe to that podcast feed and it'll show up on their phone. Or I can go find the URL on the website and share that in all these various ways. So it can be included in your church newsletter, it can be posted on any social channel. It's in all the places. I love the internet because it can be in all the places, just whenever it needs to be. No problem. Yes?
Does that app link that, I mean, you said something about it will go to iTunes. Can you also get it to go to places like Stitcher and the other places where podcasts are these days?
I think so. That's a good question. Can it go to other podcast locations, Stitcher, etc.? Often, yes, because I think you're able to get the RSS feed from it, and all Stitcher needs is the RSS feed, and it can pull any content. Yeah. That was, now we're entering a podcast class, which will stay tuned for next year's eFormation. I'm inviting myself back to talk about podcasts. Potentially a new one that's going to exist, right, Keith? All right, number 5. This is my favorite one. This maybe is the most important one. This is probably the most important thing I'm going to say to you the entire weekend we're together. Except for when I told Keith I wanted to go running. All the things. Okay, let's play a game. Who can name them all together? What's this one?
Facebook,
Okay.
Reddit,
Reddit, all right. Instagram, Twitter.
Snapchat.
Yep. Periscope, which is the live stream component of Twitter. I should have put Meerkat up here. Meerkat kind of emerged first as a live streaming entity, mainly through Twitter, and then Periscope came out, and Periscope ended up winning. If you ever go live on Twitter, you're using Periscope. Yeah. Okay.
Google Plus.
Google Plus. Yeah, everyone's favorite social network that we don't use. Yeah. YouTube, which is even more of a social network than it ever used to be. They've added more social feeds and channels to it where it actually has the ability for creators to just post like updates, not just videos. I think it's always been a social platform because really social media is just, what we call the current state of the internet. Web 2.0 used to be the thing we talked about, and now social media is like just the social web. So people interact with people. YouTube, social network, okay? WhatsApp. I'm in a room of smart people. I like it. Yep. Anyone here use WhatsApp? Yeah, look at you people. You're all hip. I don't. I've got to catch up still. Okay? Oh, Zanga. Zanga's a very old blogging platform that's making a comeback. It's gotten rebranded. It still exists. My first blog was on Zanga back in college. It's good. It's good. Okay, we're in the hard stuff. This is the hard end. This is Beam, which I'd say is a social network. It's a company in New York. Anyone here heard of a guy named Casey Neistat? He's a YouTuber. If not, you should also Google. That's the most important thing I've said to you all weekend. You should look up Casey Neistat. He's a phenomenal content creator, filmmaker. He started a company called Beam, which when it first came out, it was like kind of like a Snapchat type of a thing where you would just do this and it would take a video and you take it down and it then posts it to your account. So the idea was that it eliminated the technology from getting in the way of the experience and sharing it. That company failed. Snapchat won, Instagram won. People wanted to hold their phone in front of their face. But CNN thought, you guys have built some cool technology and have a cool little thing going for you. We want to buy you. So they bought the company. And now Beam is a news sharing app. It's like a YouTube channel, but they have an app called Panels. So Panels is the app you can download, P-A-N-E-L-S. And what Panels lets you do is the people from the Beam team will like share a question or a prompt. Like, what are your thoughts on whose button is bigger? And then anyone with the app can then see that prompt, hold up their phone, and record a video of them offering their thoughts on this. And you know how like when you turn on the news, on cable news, you see, the host, and then you see all the little screens of talking heads, the panels of people talking. The app lets you become a panelist. So then you are providing your content that they pull from for the news videos that they make on those issues. It's a really cool thing. I went on a way too long rant about it, but I'm really obsessed with it right now. So it's really cool. Panels, check it out. It's cool to think about how it's evolving the way we use technology to connect and share information. So Beam, Panels. Okay, continue. Slack, kind of a social network. It's like a messaging app that's replacing email in workplaces. It's pretty cool. How about this one? One of the biggest live video networks in the world. Twitch, which if you're a gamer, you know it's where a lot of video games are streamed through Twitch, other things as well, but primarily games. So I show you all these things for the most very important message I could ever say to you. You don't have to do all the things. You don't have to, in fact, just don't do all the things. That's how it should be. You can't do all the things. Why would you want to half-ass anything when you could full-ass something? Don't do it all. Do the ones that maybe really work with the ministry you have. Or my often rule of thumb for social media is do the ones that bring you joy and happiness, the ones that are fun. Because if it's not fun, you're not going to keep doing it. This is the Steve Jobs clip that Keat shared last night. How do you do these hard things? Well, it has to be something you're passionate about. I only really do Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I gave up on Snapchat. I said, I'm done, calling it quits. I don't really do live stuff here. I dabble in YouTube. I'm obsessed with Beam. We use Slack at work. But when it comes to like organizations I work for and social channels I run, I'm like, okay, we're going to do 3. I don't think we should do a Snapchat channel. What's the point? I mean, there's points, but I'm not, trying to market to 14-year-olds. I'm trying to use these 3 intentions. Maybe for you, it's just 1. You don't have to use Twitter. You could just use Facebook. Maybe the question you should ask is, where are your people? Or where are the people you're trying to engage and connect with? I know for me, I continue to find that the congregations I serve, they aren't really on Twitter. Not many of them. Some of them are, but not really. They are kind of on Instagram, but maybe a little more. But they're pretty much all on Facebook. I like to think that, once upon a time, we lived in a world where if you asked a room of people, let's just try right now. How many of you have an email address? How many? Once upon a time, there would not have been a 100% hand raise. How many of you have a Facebook account? I think Facebook is the new email. Facebook is pretty much everywhere. Not quite. And in fact, marketers have ruined email anyway. Remember when you used to love opening your email? Ooh, Groupon sent me something. I can't wait to see what it is. Unsubscribe, archive, delete, get out of my space. Facebook is now where we put our attention with even some, sometimes positivity, sometimes just cat videos. Yeah.
We're getting the chain emails now.
From me, yeah. So Facebook to me is a very saturated market, especially amongst the people that often find themselves in churches. So I continue to see Facebook as a way to engage with people. In fact, I at one point had deleted my life on Facebook. I was like, I'm done, overwhelming, can't handle this. And then when I started serving a congregation in New York about 5 years ago, I joined it again because I was like, I want to be where the people are. So I had to be on Facebook. It's hard to know the things that people are saying about their lives if you're not in that space. It's like knowing that your entire congregation hangs out at this coffee shop and you decide to go to that one. Sometimes you should go to that one, but if you want to know what's happening in their lives, you can't go to that one. I had one colleague who once said, people are posting on Facebook that they're in the hospital. They should be calling the church to tell us that. Or maybe the church should be in the space where they're sharing that. Because when they post that on Facebook that they're in the hospital or they need someone to pray for them, within moments, their Facebook post is filled with comments from their community saying, I'm praying for you. Is there anything you need? I'm here for you. How can I help? A phone call to the church would not offer that immediate support and community. Oh, digital ministry is real ministry, maybe. Don't do all the things. Do the ones that bring you life, bring you joy, bring you happiness. Do the ones that serve your congregation. Serve the ministry you're called to do. So now I want us to kind of lift the plane off the ground again. We're going to take the rest of our time, which is about 10, 15, 20 minutes or so, 10 minutes, I think I'm getting the official sign to give us a little bit of breath before the closing. Just for your questions. What are the questions you have? Where can we dive in specifically with your context? How can we keep these things practical? What questions do you have? I don't guarantee that I'll answer them all because for 2 reasons. I don't believe in answering questions you don't know the answer to, and I'm in a room full of incredibly smart people, so we might just let you all show your smartness to the world. But I want to start with your question. So let's before anyone speaks, let's all just take 30 seconds to just sit. And this has been I talk fast in case you didn't notice, a lot of information and ideas. So let's let it kind of soak in and just kind of fumble around, maybe scroll through the Twitter feed, look through your notes, do a yoga pose. Where does this land for you? What are the questions that you are taking off with that we as a group can hear, can hold, can respond to online? I'm looking at you. You're in on this too. Throw up a hand. Use your voice. Yes.
I'm just appreciative of you acknowledging that we can't do all the things.
Appreciative that we can't do all the things. Yeah. I'm pretty sure we're all still human. Cyborg, yes, but still human. Until we become fully robotic and the singularity takes over, we will never be able to do all the things.
And it kind of touches on that, what we were talking about yesterday with digital fatigue.
Yeah.
That we feel like we have to do all the things that we can't. So thank you for acknowledging that.
You're welcome. It's okay to turn your phone off or to turn the notifications off. If you don't believe it, I officially give you permission. You are ordained in the ministry of turning notifications off. What else? Questions, thoughts? Yes.
Could you speak to I feel very encouraged to try some new digital things and likely won't do it well at first. So can you speak to
Yes.
where is the threshold between how good you can get at something before you publish it?
This is my favorite. I love this whole line of thinking. How many of you have heard the podcast Radiolab? Anybody? A few of us? Okay. Radiolab, it comes out of WNYC in New York. It's one of the most popular podcasts ever, I think. Two people host it, Jad Abumrad and I forget his name, sorry. Jad is a professionally composed sound designer. He can make soundscapes that are incredible. If you listen to Radiolab, you hear this immersive audio experience that him and his team create. And I'm just blown away by it. They're in their, I don't know, 7th season or something. They've been doing it for a long time. I was like, what did they sound like when they first started? So I hunted through the archives and I found episode 1. It sounded horrible. At least compared to the Radiolab I'm used to. Everyone always aims to begin at episode 100. But you got to begin at episode 1. And in fact, you got to make some shitty first drafts that no one even sees. And then eventually you have to acknowledge that episode 1 is not your last episode. Often when I supervise interns in ministry settings and they have the opportunity to preach, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give them is, okay, you're only going to preach one sermon. I mean, not in your whole life, but this Sunday. You're going to feel the need to preach all of your sermons in this one sermon. No, just preach one sermon at a time, please, because you're going to get to do it again and again and again. And if you don't fail fast, if you're afraid of failing, you're actually afraid of learning from those mistakes. So don't let the possibility of failure stop you from even trying. Embrace that as the ground that you can stand on to get towards episode 2 and episode 3, episode 4. My 30 seconds or less project that I showed you up there. I'm really proud of some of the final episodes. The audio quality, the video work I was able to do. I even began shooting original content. The first episodes, I began my public podcast project at a hotel in Minneapolis when I landed to go to Spark House at Augsburg Fortress with my headphone microphone connected to my cell phone. And I recorded the audio through a voice memo. And I did that for 2 months. And I used GarageBand, a free program to edit the thing. I still use GarageBand to edit all my podcasts. I have Pro Tools, but I don't use it. I don't know how to use it. It's okay for your first round to feel like a first round. I've been doing yoga for over a year, and when I do downward dog, my heels still don't touch the ground.
Amen.
But I still do yoga every day. So don't let the myth that your first episode needs to sound like episode 100 stop you from making your first episode. If you do, you're never going to get to episode 100. We are running a marathon, people. The goal is to keep doing this and keep doing this. Another thing on that, in the world of YouTube, there's a YouTuber named Hank Green. Him and his brother John Green have a channel called The Vlog Brothers. They're phenomenal. I would recommend it for one particular episode where Hank Green talked about his secret to productivity, which he called the 80% rule, where he takes any project he's working on and gets it 80% of the way there and then he hits publish. Because the time it would take to do the final 20% is often longer than the other work you already did. And only like 5 people in the world are really going to know the difference between 80% and 100%. And the trick is, if you do that over time, your 80% mark gets better and better and better. The first podcast you make, your 80% good enough is going to be much different than when you get to episode 100. You will just learn these skills. So the trick is to just, just keep going. And what's the Energizer Bunny, Thomas the Train? Someone just look up the meme for it there. Yeah. All right, slight rant. Lovely question. That was a great softball for me. Thank you. Anyone else? We have time for a few more. Online friends? I know you've got something. Amy. Amy's going to have a question for us in a minute, but until Amy, over here.
What would be helpful is if you could tell us how you spend your day. Because I've been talking to a lot of side conversations here about people who are saying, I don't have the time.
Yeah.
And we start talking the day, they're like, I get up in the morning and I find that just the resolution to like read scripture, I can't fit it right now. So Mary Hass is someone who got brought up. She, teaches this kind of stuff. And, she actually laid out last time, she spoke at eFormation maybe 2 years ago. And I remember people said it was one of her big takeaways. She gave this great talk that people didn't remember. What they remember is that she spends a half an hour in the evening on Facebook. That gets a half an hour. And in the morning, she spends 1 hour doing whatever it is. She actually shared how long it takes for her to have been able to speak the way she spoke about the things that she used. So, like in your life, like you said, you do ministry, you work at a church. Is there a way you can figure out how many hours that you spend in the day on this kind of thing?
Kind of. I love that conversation. That's a great exercise, I think, that I'd love to see replicated. That'd be a really cool workshop to have everyone just kind of plot out a visual timeline of their day and how they use it to share that as resources. So that'll be my other workshop I do next year at eFormation. I'm just inviting myself to everything now. How do I spend my day? That's a great question. So all those things I listed at the beginning that I do. So yeah, I'm full-time at Riverside. I am like part-time at the Center for Progressive Renewal. There's some overlap in that work. They're advantageous. I also do some social media consulting with an agency for the United Methodist Church. So I'm playing in these fields a lot. I launch new projects. I swear to myself that my creativity does not exist for the highest bidder. I will make things because no one is paying me to make it. If I don't do that, I'm simply selling out my creativity. So I'm committed to that. I don't have a very firm and fixed timeline I can give you of like when I'm checking what platforms. At times I lean into it the way I try to lean into email, which is that it's not a ubiquitous part of my life, but it's an intentional check-in throughout the day. So I've tried, I haven't succeeded in the rhythms of like morning, noon, and end of day, email check-in. But at times I get that rhythm going. I try to think of email similarly. I try not to think of it as like, have to respond immediately. It's like, no. I can let this tweet sit. Or if I'm in the moment, I can respond to it. So I don't have a formula for that, but here's what I can tell you. Here's the one thing that I'm able to clearly say that is the reason I can do all of these things. I wake up almost every day at 5:30 for two reasons. One, because the alarm is set. Two, because the coffee pot goes off at 5:45. Three, because the cats are jumping on my feet to get fed, and my wife pushes me out of bed to feed them. I get up at 5:30, feed the cats. I set out the yoga mats. I pour the coffee. My wife gets out of bed at 5:45 or by 6 o'clock. We spend a half an hour doing yoga in the morning in our living room. Yoga with Adrian, by the way, if you're looking for a great at-home YouTube channel for yoga. Yoga's finished. She cleans up the yoga mats. She makes the bed and feeds the cats. I get out the blender and pull out the superfoods and make a superfood smoothie for us both for breakfast with vegan probiotics sold at Amazon and Juice Press, neither of which are sponsoring this talk. I'm still hungry, so I usually make myself a toasted peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Then I make lunch for both of us for work. Then we're out the door by 8:30. I get on a city bike, a bike share, and I bike 2 miles to go to work. I spend my day at work, and when I get to work, I sprint. I am hustling. I am constantly going, and I'm aware of that. The latest thing is this year I do push-ups. I'm doing 50 push-ups a day in January, 55 in February, and so on and so forth. My record is 26 in a row, getting there. I get to work, I go all in, I do all these things, I shuffle projects, I recognize that multitasking is a myth. Thank you, last night's session. And I try to focus on a thing and do it. I write down my to-do list on paper. I put it on note cards in front of me so I can see it. An app will go away on my screen, but a note card is staring me in the face. And if I don't know it, if I need to take a project home, I put it in my pocket and take a project home. I have a notebook that I write ideas down in because a couple reasons. One, in a conversation with somebody, if I pull out a phone to capture an idea, it looks like I'm just checking Twitter. If I pull out a notebook, it looks like I'm really smart. Also, if I do this to my notebook, no one gasps. But if I do this, I'm intentional about the ways in which I capture content information. I get home. I try to walk out the office at 5 o'clock every day. Sometimes it's 5:30 if I talk to people on my way out. I get on a bike. I bike 2 miles home. Either myself or my wife makes dinner. She's a grad school student getting her MFA in creative nonfiction, so she's often writing a piece after her workday. So I cook dinner. I cook it with my hands and I smell it. Thank you, Green Chef, for teaching me how to cook. Also, who's not sponsoring this? We got some sponsors for next year. Okay. I open ingredients and I know how to do the garlic before you do the onions, and I use pans and I make this stuff, and then we sit down either at the table and have a conversation, or sometimes we're just exhausted, so we sit down on the couch and we watch The Good Place and we eat a homemade meal. And then maybe we both decide we want our creative energy to lead us into more projects, so we do work together. Maybe we decide that we don't, so we decide we're gonna just play a board game. Or maybe it's the summer and the sun still exists, so we go to Central Park and go on a run. I run. I find that if you ask me how I pray, I would say 2 ways. I breathe and I run. Those are my 2 primary modalities of prayer. They connect me to what it means to be human, and they allow my mind to slow down and God to be present in all things. So it's only by doing that that I'm able to do the things that I listed. It's taking care of this one physicality I've got. Because my goal is to live to be 117, because that way I'll live through an entire century. I want to live to the year 2100, because I think a century is a time frame that most people don't experience physically. We live in, decades, and we think of generations, but how many of us have experienced a century? I want to. And it's a lofty goal that makes me change the choices I make now. I want to outlive Twitter. Twitter started 12 years ago. I want to be alive when it's dead. So I want to be a part of the things that come after it. So I need to take care of what I've got now so I can keep doing these things. I'm running the marathon, not the sprint. So that's, I guess, my best answer. You're welcome. Yes, does Amy have a question?
Yes, she does.
Yes.
So she asks, where can you learn how to use all the various platforms more effectively?
Where can you learn how to use all the platforms more effectively? Center for Progressive Renewal, progressiverenewal.org/courses. There's going to be a social media course coming this summer. Keith, I need to talk to you about that, by the way. That's a great question. Where can you learn to use these more effectively? Trial and error is the first thing to start with. In community is another one. Don't feel like you have to do it by yourself. Find other people who want to learn together. Where can you learn formal training? If you've never seen Gary Vaynerchuk talk about social media, I'd recommend you look him up. Gary V is what he goes by a lot. He used to have a regular YouTube show called Ask Gary V, where he would talk about marketing and media and social media. Now he does just more of like a daily vlog following his life, but he still has some great resources in his books. He has a book called Jab, 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 Right Hook, which talks about the ways to use different social platforms. Or perhaps the better version of that would be something like Click to Save Reboot Edition, which comes out March, which looks at the different social platforms and the ways you can use them. But I want to hear from the room. What else? Where do you go to learn how to use these platforms more robustly? Yeah.
Social Media Today.
Social Media Today. Is that a website?
Yes, I linked them on Facebook, and so just once a day they post something that is, hey, here's how you can use Instagram better. Here's stuff on Twitter. Here's the most recent metrics on Snapchat, this, that, and the other.
Social Media Today. Look them up on Facebook. You'll find their websites, all that stuff. Great, I'm doing that. What else? Where do you go to learn social media stuff and all these things better? Yeah, Keith?
When you leave here, follow all the workshop leaders and watch what they do and see the projects they're working on. I learned the most from watching people like Jim and seeing what they're doing and how they're playing with these different platforms. And it's also nice to see them not just in the big projects they're doing, but in the kind of day-to-day, kind of smaller stuff, just how you kind of do what you do. And then and then I try to see what might work for me in that.
Do you guys remember the movie Finding Forrester? Anyone seen that? Gus Van Sant movie, where there's the moment when John Connery brings out the typewriter for Jamal Wallace to begin working on his first piece, and he gives him one of his old pieces, and Jamal starts typing on the keyboard, the typewriter, and there's my favorite line, and Sean Connery, and only as Sean Connery can do it, says, "Punch the keys! Punch the," and it's this loud, and he's beginning to punch the keys, put some passion into it, by simply replicating someone else's piece of content. I'm not saying plagiarize. No, that was a good message from that movie as well. You don't plagiarize. He got in trouble for turning in an essay that was not properly credited. But you begin by emulating the voices around you. I aspire in my podcast to sound like Roman Mars, the host of 99% Invisible. I want to create video content online that Casey Neistat will see someday and go, this guy's pretty good. I want to make things that the people I learn from will be impressed by. I want to model my work after them as well. So yeah, follow everyone, walk their steps first. How do they shoot a free throw? Learn to do it that way. But do it so that you can find your own voice. That's the most important thing, so that you can find your voice along the way. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, Caroline, she shared a link to a website called Digital Disciple Network.
DigitalDiscipleNetwork.com. DigitalDiscipleNetwork.com.
Actually, .wordpress.com.
DigitalDiscipleNetwork.wordpress.com. Perfect. A podcast I discovered just a couple weeks ago is by Buffer called The Science of Social Media. It's one of my new favorite podcasts. It's like weekly. It's two people who have a conversation about some latest things in the world of social media. It's like 12 minutes long each episode. Well, that's something I do too. In my morning routine, when I'm making breakfast, I have my little ear pods in, which I got for Christmas, which is the greatest gift. I love them so much. And I listen to podcasts, or I watch YouTube videos while I'm making breakfast. Where am I going to fit that stuff in? Oh, and my lunch breaks at work are often me, closing my door or going to a cafe and watching YouTube videos and absorbing this information that I want to learn from. So I work that into the nooks and crannies of my life. All right. I think we have time for one final thought, question, comment, snide remark. You know who you are. This is your moment. Yes, it's you. Go ahead, say it. Oh, that's supposed to work. Okay, the plane's gonna go away then. You can find me in lots of places. I would love to stay in touch. I would love to hear the projects you're doing. I would love to see your episode 1 and your episode 10 and your episode 100. I would love to continue to be available to answer any questions you might have. So you can find me in lots of social channels. Really, I just use those 3 as Ideas Done Daily. That's my personal email address, so you can shoot me there. I'm pretty Googleable. There's like 2 Jim Keats in the world, me and my dad, I think. We're both Reverend Jim Keats. That might be hard. He's a Lutheran pastor, though. Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor. Oh, there we go. I knew there'd be a groan from that one. And he's amazing. I love you, Dad. You're the best. So you can keep in touch. I would love to stay in touch. Let's see the things you're making. I think the best thing about the internet is that it's a network. None of us are going to be the Walter Cronkite's of the internet, because that model doesn't exist. It's not about one individual who says content. It's a space for engagement with one another. So I can't wait to share that digital sandbox with you all and engage with you in the work that you're doing in the world and in the church and in all sorts of places. There's a thing coming up next in like 5 minutes, I think. So go in peace, or go in pieces, and take yourself there. And we'll see you in 5 minutes, I guess. Thanks, everybody.
Amy said thank you.
You're welcome, Amy. Ten people? What? Super fun.